All right, man. Well, hey, thanks for joining us for another episode of Triple Play, and please remember to
Like and subscribe.
or subscribe and like.
That's right.
Yep. And don't forget to keep getting the word out. We also have the new website out, merch. I've been getting a lot of questions. Merch, we got it. We're going to keep adding to it. And if you see something that you want us to add, let us know. But please go out and grab some merch that helps support the podcast, and we'll continue to grow it. Don't forget to look back at past episodes. I've been noticing a ton of our past episodes keep cranking. So, hey, we appreciate that. Some really fun interviews that we've had, and especially the last several weeks. It's been awesome. And on top of that, don't forget to support those that support us. We got Resource One at 636-458-1798, and
We got Chris at CS Design, 573-436-3717.
that's right.
Those guys are great. They've both been in. But who do we got today?
Today we got Marv.
We got Marv.
Would be me.
Marv. And Marv is with, we're going to call it MAC for short, but it is the Missouri Association of Creation. So, and he has been a part of that. How long have you been part of MAC?
I think I started with him in about I'm going to guess 2007.
So just a little while.
Yeah. Been at it for a while.
And Marv graduated from St. Louis University, so a year before I was born. That makes you old, buddy.
Yeah, I'm pretty old.
I'm old. I tell my kids I'm older than dirt, man. So
Well, I'm older than that. So.
So you got a BA in marketing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you currently serve as president of Missouri Association for Creation. So not only are you part of MAC, but now you're the president. So how'd that happen?
I always laugh because Groucho Marx used to say he'd never be a member. He would never join a club that would have him as a member. Somehow I got to be president of MAC.
Yeah.
But it's been good. We've really been able to expand our speakers bureau and get out into the community, churches, homeschool groups.
Yeah.
And teach the truth of biblical creation.
I think my first introduction to you guys is you guys did something with our church where we went to the zoo, and you guys set up little areas along the zoo, and my kids kind of would go in, and you guys would talk about how that applied to creation, and it was absolutely phenomenal how that laid down. My kids loved it, and it was experiencing a zoo and animals, but then taking that twist and giving it, okay, here's how this all came about, and I learned some things. I mean, I've been to Bible college, done a lot of things, and yet I feel like I'm always a sponge when I'm around you guys because I'm always picking up one more thing. And what's cool about that is, as a believer, that's one of the things I get asked a lot when I'm at the gym or around it. Common questions are around creation. Do you really believe the earth is only, this age, or the Big Bang? You hear these different, ideas that people have implanted through, academia. Or in my other passion, I know Scott's very passionate about creationism, so this is going to be a fun discussion.
Okay, cool.
And I'm
My
big on
man, Marv. You're my man.
and I've been big on astronomy over the years. When I look at the universe, I'm just at the stars. I've got a couple telescopes. I was heavily involved in St. Louis Astronomy Society for a while. I just really find that passionate. But those are areas where I think people have questions, but I also think those are areas where God displays himself, and there's such a great opportunity to talk about him.
Well, we call the zoo God's Art Museum. It is, when you look at these animals, and we do a zoo tour twice a year.
Okay.
We do one in the spring and one in the fall. We do it for 2 days. We normally we'll have 500 people over the course of those 2 days. So we'll do 1,000 people a year will come.
Awesome.
To the zoo day, but essentially what we do is we'll have 7 speakers at 7 different animals, and then as groups come around, we tell them the awesome way that God created each one, and every animal is so amazing.
Yeah.
And I mean, the one I talk about a lot is the giraffe, because people don't think about, you have a giraffe with a 6-foot-long neck. So he has to have a heart like a jackhammer because he's got to pump blood straight uphill 6 feet to get to his brain. So his heart actually beats 150 times a minute, and it's pounding. I mean, it has to pound to get that blood up to his brain. So what happens now when he gets thirsty and he wants to get a drink? So he bends down to get a drink, and now that blood is being pumped downhill instead of uphill, the blood pressure will absolutely kill him. Except that in his blood vessels in his neck, there are valves. So just like you would shut off a water faucet, these valves shut down and they stop the flow of blood to his brain. You go, well, now, wait a minute, that can't be good. Except that under his brain, there's a sponge, okay? And the last spurt of blood before those valves shut down are headed for his brain like a bullet and going to kill him, except that sponge absorbs the impact. And then while he's getting a drink, the blood that's in that sponge is circulating in his brain and getting oxygen to his brain. So now he sees this lion coming up, and he says, I don't want to be lunch, so he stands up real fast to run away. What would happen to us if we did that?
Pass out.
We'd pass, that's right. So the lion eats him, no more giraffes, that's it. Except when he does that, those valves open back up, everything resumes as normal. A giraffe can gallop at 35 miles per hour. A giraffe's kick will kill a lion. So sometimes they get away, sometimes they don't. But the bottom line is this. If he had the heart without the neck, he couldn't survive. The blood pressure would kill him. If he had the neck without the heart, he couldn't survive. If he had both of those but he didn't have the valves in his neck, he couldn't survive. If he had all three of those but he didn't have the sponge under his brain, he couldn't survive. So all four of those things have to be there all at the same time. And if the theory of evolution is true, they all would have had to evolve at exactly the same time.
Yeah.
What are the odds of that?
Zero.
Or he couldn't make it. And there's other things about him too. I mean, a giraffe, his lungs are 25 pounds. Okay. And he has to be able, when I'm at the zoo with the kids and I talk about the giraffe, I ask them if they could drink a soda through a 10-foot long straw. Well, we could, but not all in one. You know, we'd have to, and then put our finger on the end of the straw. Well, a giraffe has a 10-foot long windpipe. So he's got to draw air into his lungs through a 10-foot long windpipe. That's why his lungs are 25 pounds. That's why they're so big and powerful. So
Incredible.
I could tell you, listen, I could go on and on.
Well, Marv, look, can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
I want you to go on and on. That's why we have you here.
Exactly, but what I find interesting, and I know this a little bit because you gave us this bio earlier today, your interest in this kind of started from fifth graders, right? Wasn't it like one of your daughters, granddaughters? Give us a little bit about what was the peak of it pulling you in?
Well, I was a 50-year-old man when God said, I've had enough out of you. And there's a whole story behind how I came to faith. It's absolutely amazing. But at any rate, I hadn't
share that, by the way. We're not in a time crunch. So you share what you feel comfortable with.
Just
want you to know.
real briefly, I ignored God my entire life. I had an 11-year-old son, my son Mick, that spent the night with a friend on a Saturday night, went to Baptist church with him on Sunday morning, heard the gospel message first time in his life, understood it immediately, came home and started yelling at my wife and I, why didn't you tell me this? This is really important. And I said something, really...
inappropriate?
Yeah, I said, shut up and go to your room. And at any rate, over the course of the next 13 years, we watched him. We watched him grow in his faith. He wouldn't lie to me, the little bitty, smallest little white lie that would have got him out of trouble. He wouldn't do it. So I could go further into it, but it took 13 years for me. It was 11 years for my wife. And we came to faith, and it was watching my son. And then we wound up at New Community Church, and there's a whole long story behind that. But bottom line is, in my family now, through the Lord didn't send Billy Graham, and he didn't send, he sent an 11-year-old boy into my house. And my wife and I subsequently were saved. My oldest son, Matt, was saved. My daughter, Hannah, was saved. And we have one more holdout, my son Joe, who we'd appreciate your prayers. He's out in Liberty, Missouri. But
Come on,
yeah,
Joe.
there we go. So that's kind of how it happened. But I hadn't been saved very long, and I just really got interested in the whole creation thing. And bottom line was, at that time, I believed evolution. I wasn't rabid about it. I just believed it because that's what they taught me in school.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of people are. I think, you just kind of go with the status quo until you start asking the questions, right?
Right,
So-
and that's exactly what happened. I started asking questions, and I started going on a variety of websites, Answers in Genesis and creation.com and Institute for Creation Research. I'm reading this stuff, and I'm going, this is logical.
Mm.
And I knew it to be true. So I really got into not just studying what the Bible said about creation, which I did a lot, and not just in Genesis, but all through the Bible. But I also was studying the theory of evolution and what they profess and the whole thing. At any rate, I started going to Missouri Association for Creation meetings. And we, at that time, the association really, and we still meet once a month. The second Monday of the month, we're currently meeting at the Rock Church in Baldwin. And you can find out more about that by going to mocreation.org, mocreation.org.
And just so our listeners know, we're going to put that on this episode. So if they're watching this episode, whether it be audio or visual, if they look in the notes, it'll be there, so they can grab that link. Yeah, we'll have that link there, and they can grab it. So
Well, I started going to these meetings, and at the time, what it was a bunch of people getting together once a month, and we'd watch a video, and we'd hear a speaker, and then everybody would go home, and nobody was doing anything for the kingdom. So I wrote a letter to the president of MAC at that time, a man named Ivan Bergner, and I just said, hey, we got all these people with all this knowledge. We need to start a speakers bureau. And he called me on the phone and said, congratulations, you're in charge.
that's great.
That's the way it usually happens.
Yeah.
So we put the Speakers Bureau together, and it was really, that was in 2009. It was really slow to get going. And we had to get the word out, and pastors needed to know about us and what have you. And one of our guys, Scott Jarris, who you know.
I love Scott. Yeah,
Yeah.
Scott's a great guy. In fact, I mentioned that we were having you on, and it was funny. I think it was Don when we had him on our last episode, and I said, yeah, we're going to have this guy named Marv. He goes, yeah, there's this guy from our church who's really awesome about creation too. His name is Scott Jarris. I'm like, oh, I know Scott real well. He's awesome. And we're going to try to get him in here too eventually because he's got so much good information. So
Well, at any rate,
and maybe one of these days we can do our podcast together, right? Maybe we'll get you guys in here and we'll do a
little slideshow. We'll do a little presentation.
Yeah, we'll join you for one of your podcasts, and we'll put them up on both of our sites.
Scott and I actually, this is off the subject a little bit, but Scott and I actually we do about a 45-minute thing between we call it One Day at the Coffee Shop. Actually, we're changing the name to One Day at the Coffee Shop, but essentially I'm at the coffee shop with my laptop open. He comes in, he's a guy I haven't seen since college, and we kind of reacquaint. And I have a rock sitting on the table. And he eventually says, what's this? And I say, well, it's not a table decoration. That is an amazing rock. I was sitting on my deck one night, and it appeared out of nowhere. Nobody threw it. It didn't bounce on the deck. I was looking down, and it wasn't there, and then it was there. And he, of course, says, are you feeling okay, or what's the deal here? And I go, well, wait a minute. Do you believe in the Big Bang? And then we launch into that. That's how we launch into it. So it's something that we're really wanting to get in front of youth groups and what have you.
Yeah, I saw you guys do with our youth group. I think in the past year it was pretty good.
Right.
So
Right. So at any rate, we put the Speakers Bureau together. What really put us on the map in the fall of 2012, we did our first zoo tour, and we put it out to the homeschool community. And Scott Jarris is in charge of it. He put it out at 11 o'clock one night. He put it out to the homeschool groups, and at 1 o'clock in the morning, he had like 20 families registered already.
wow.
And he emailed me and he goes, I think we're on to something here. So that really put us on the map, and we really got to know a lot of pastors, a lot of youth leaders, and things like that. And then, of course, when COVID hit, it kind of died a little bit, but we're really getting it moving again. We're starting to see a lot of activity, and in fact, the Zoo Day is coming up at the end of April, our 2 days at the zoo, and we do 500 people. We limit it to that in consultations with the zoo. They don't want the groups to get too big and what have you.
Right.
At any rate, we had 740 people wanted to come,
That's awesome.
and it's limited to 500. So,
So you need to add another day, is what you're saying. You're going to have to do like add another event sometime throughout the year where you do another couple of days, because I think it's awesome when God prospers a ministry and it's for His glory, right? I mean,
absolutely. And we have several other ways that we that we can come alongside churches and homeschool groups and Christian schools. I mean, we've done something called a Creation Weekend, which Creation Weekend, normally we show a film on Friday night, like Evolution's Achilles' Heels, or maybe Is Genesis History.
That's a good one. I like that one. I have that one.
Right, and then Saturday morning, we'll have a presentation on the relevance of the Book of Genesis, the creation account, and why it's so important. It's fundamental to everything we believe in. And then after that, we'll have 3 different presentations. People can choose from 3 different ones, like at 9:30, and then 3 others at 10:30, and we have a Q&A. So we talk about everything from DNA to the flood to creation evangelism.
Yeah, so if churches in the area are interested, they can go to the website that we'll have out there. They can reach out to Marv and the group and see about it. If they want to do a Creation Weekend, if they want to do maybe their own church has a zoo event of some sort or things like that. And then also I'd imagine, because we got people out of state listening in, and just like one of our previous guests who started something called Christian Family Day at the ballpark, and nobody had heard of in the 80s, and now it's duplicated across the country. I'm sure, just like I know Judy's heart, I know your heart, that if somebody were interested in starting this in another city or another community, they should just reach out to you, and you'd be glad to get them in touch with the right resources and help them out in all you can.
Yeah, we would love to help them. In fact, I just got, last week I was in Mount Vernon, Illinois, with a homeschool group there.
Awesome.
They wanted me to teach the kids on complexity, and I told my wife, because there were 4 groups, 5 and 6 year olds, 7 and 8 year olds, and then 9 and 10, and then 11 and up. And I didn't have a problem with the older kids. I thought, how am I going to teach these younger kids? Those younger kids were awesome.
Oh, yeah, they're sponges, aren't they? They love it.
Man, it was amazing, even though I was talking about complexity, and I was telling them about the giraffe and the bombardier beetle. And
What can you tell me about the bombardier beetle?
If you've ever heard of the bombardier beetle?
I've heard of it.
No,
I wanna know.
I've never even heard of it.
This is what I imagine. If people knew, just for example, when you were talking about the giraffe, all the complexities of that one animal spread out through thousands and hundreds of millions of different animals, if they just knew how impossible it would be for that giraffe to exist compared to, so that's why I want to hear about the beetles.
Yeah, tell us about them. I'm interested too now.
Well, the bombardier beetle, his defense mechanism, now think about this. He mixes 2 chemicals. He has a mixing chamber, an explosion chamber. Now, a bombardier beetle's about the size of maybe my index fingernail, okay? So he has an explosion chamber where he mixes 2 chemicals, and then another one comes in that's a catalyst for these 2, and it makes it explode.
Okay.
Okay, so how come the bombardier beetle doesn't explode? Well, he actually has, it's almost like a gun turret that comes out of his backside, and he can aim it in any direction, including forward. He can aim it, and it shoots hot gas at his predator. Okay? Now, if he doesn't have the 2 chemicals, the catalyst, the explosion chamber, the gun turret, if he has the first 4 things, he's dead. He's just going to blow up, right? Or the first 3 things, he's going to blow up. But here's the other thing. Scientists started studying this bombardier beetle, and they couldn't figure out. he's got this huge explosion shooting hot gas out the back. Why didn't he take off like a jet plane?
That's a good question.
Very good question. So they started studying them in slow motion, and you can find videos on YouTube of the bombardier beetle.
We'll throw one up.
Okay, so at any rate, the reason if you see a bombardier beetle shooting the gas, it sounds like, a pop like that. When they did it in slow motion, there are 500 bursts per second. So it's shooting it like a machine gun, and because it's doing 500 bursts a second, that's why he don't take off like a jet plane when he shoots that hot gas out.
So he moves. It's just minuscule, lots of times.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So, and there's, like I said, there's videos of them like shooting a spider and things like that.
Oh man.
How does something like this evolve? How exactly would something like that evolve?
That's a great question, man. I've always thought the idea of evolution just never made sense to me because when I just started looking at the eye, like I just look at the human eye and the complexities of the human eye, that deer blows my mind away. And then you start to like take that into other aspects of even the human body, and then we're talking about giraffes and other. I mean,
What kills it for me is the fish to land thing. You have an animal that breathes oxygen underwater.
Right. And then all of a sudden it's up on.
And then all of a sudden, even if it was like, oh wow, I can breathe for a couple seconds, and then it goes back down. Eventually, that shift needs to happen, right? Well, the fish that comes out of the water,
Yeah.
is not completely evolved. He's just going to die in the land. Okay.
Right.
What about his mate? Okay, none of those genes are going to get passed. That guy's dead on land, and we got to start over. And you never. Oh, I made it on land and I'm alive. Now I'm gonna procreate with what? What else is on land?
Well, there's so much to it. Look, even if you think about it, sexual reproduction. The woman or the female has a certain set of organs that they need for reproduction. Now, the male has to evolve the sperm in order to fertilize the egg, but they're evolving completely different plumbing, completely different people, I guess you'd say.
or species,
Species, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're talking about animals and humans. All this has got to happen with everything that's alive, right? So it's not we're just talking about one little instance, but we're talking. This happens with each and every animal for the most part.
Right, and he's got to develop the sperm that fertilizes the egg. The woman has all the eggs she's ever going to have when she's born. Okay?
Yeah.
Now think about this. He coincidentally is able to evolve the exact thing that's needed to fertilize that egg. Apart from her, has nothing to do with her. He develops that. Now, the woman's egg implants, right? If it's not fertilized, it does not implant.
Correct.
Okay?
Right.
So it doesn't implant, it doesn't implant, it doesn't implant. Now it's fertilized, now it implants. That's actually the baby saying, you know what, Mom, this one's okay.
Yeah.
Think about that. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's, Mom, this one's okay. And then that starts the whole process. So there's so much complexity. And one thing I talk about a lot is I use this quote a lot, and I brought this so I could just read it.
Yeah, yeah.
This is Dr. Walter Bradley, who's he's a PhD material scientist.
Okay.
And he describes a cell. Now, when we talk about a cell, remember that they tell us that all of life can be traced back to a common ancestor, which is essentially a cell that developed when a bunch of chemicals in a primordial soup, I like to call it a mud puddle, but a bunch of chemicals somehow coalesced together and formed the first living cell. That's what they tell you. So this is a description of a cell. This was in the book The Case for Faith by Lee Strobel, and Walter Bradley says, one person very creatively but quite accurately described a single-cell organism as a high-tech factory complete with artificial languages and decoding systems, central memory banks that store and retrieve impressive amounts of information, precision control systems that regulate the automatic assembly of components, proofreading and quality control mechanisms that safeguard against errors, assembly systems that use principles of prefabrication and modular construction, and a complete replication system that allows the organism to duplicate itself at bewildering speeds. This, they tell us, popped out of a mud puddle. Okay? Now, I made a list of everything he said. Mm-hmm. Now, when they talk about the Big Bang, they say, the story they tell is that all of the matter and energy in the universe were together in what they call an infinitely dense singularity. So all the matter and energy were together in this singularity, which expanded rapidly and in essence exploded into the universe that we see today. The universe is estimated to be 93 billion light years across, full of stars and galaxies and planets and space. Okay, 93 billion light years across. And if you said that, I mean, the way you would say that is a light year is 5.88 trillion miles. So the way you'd say that is 586 billion, 840 million trillion miles across the universe.
Seems pretty big.
And it was all in an infinitely dense singularity. And I always say, wait a minute, you can't start with the expansion. You got to tell me where the singularity came from. They never start there.
Right.
Well, they break the first rule of thermodynamics, which is matter cannot be created or destroyed.
Right.
They start with breaking their own laws that they come up with.
Well, and I've got something that I use all the time that I'll tell you about. But think about this. If that were true, that would explain the matter and energy. Genetic information necessary for life is neither matter or energy, and I can prove that. If I have my laptop here and I weighed it, and then I wiped all the information off the hard drive and weighed it again, would it weigh the same? Of course it would. Yeah. Information is not matter then. It's not energy either because it doesn't have the ability to produce power. So you're telling me where all the matter and energy came from. Where did the genetic information come from? If it came from a bunch of chemicals in a mud puddle, and that started it all, and here we are today, then at some point in there, chemicals had to learn how to think, right?
Replicate.
Yeah, had to learn how to think. At any rate, when we look at the cell here, Walter Bradley said there are artificial languages that conveys information, decoding systems, they process information, memory banks, they store information, assembly systems and control systems, they also process it, information retrieval system fetches it, the proofreading mechanism looks for errors, the quality control mechanism fixes the errors, the prefab modular construction system makes things, and the high-speed replication system duplicates it. So this is all information, but you've never told me where the information comes from. Where does the information come from?
How did it program itself?
And exactly. I get in a discussion all the time, well, there's artificial intelligence. Computers program themselves all the time. Well, yeah, they're programmed to program themselves. There's intelligence at the very beginning. There has to be. And in this list that Dr. Bradley gave us, if you think about it, let's just take, first of all, they all work together. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's extremely complex and it all works together. If I just take one of these, the prefabrication modular construction system. Legos are a prefabrication modular construction system.
That's true.
Would anybody look at a Lego and say, well, there's obviously no design behind that? Nobody would do that. Yet it's just a very small part of this very complex thing. And they're all systems. Any system requires intelligence.
Right.
If we look at, well, let's, as an example, we have highway systems, we have sewer systems, computer operating systems, system of government. Every system requires intelligence. It requires design. When they made the highway system in this country, they didn't say, okay, Josh, you take your crew and go that way. Scott, you take your crew and go that way. I'm going to go this way. No, the goal was to connect all the major cities, right? Using materials that would withstand all kinds of weather and the heavy semi-trucks and taking into consideration the landscape and everything else. It's all planned out. But if you look at the systems in our body, our body has 13, first of all the systems in a cell, but we have 13 different systems in our body. We have a circulatory system, we have a respiratory system, we have an immune system. We have 13 systems in our body. And if you look at the complexity of them, just think about our circulatory system, right? Our circulatory system carries oxygen and food and water through our bloodstream to our organs and tissues, right? So the blood flows through the lungs where it picks up oxygen. It then flows, it picks up through the small intestine, it picks up the nutrients and the water. And then it takes it throughout the body. We have our heartbeats on average, and mine beats slow. I'm only 53 times a minute, but the average is 72 times a minute, which means 100,000 beats a day. And it pumps the equivalent of about 2,000 gallons of blood through your body, through 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body.
It's quite a few.
That's a little bit. So it's carrying oxygen through the blood system. Now let's just say, let's give them this. Let's say that somehow that whole system evolved. Now remember that it's actually three systems because it works together with the respiratory system to get the oxygen. And it works together with the digestive system to get the nutrients. So let's say it just somehow randomly came together. So how does the blood pick up the oxygen? It does it with the protein hemoglobin. Okay. Now hemoglobin, without hemoglobin, none of this, even if it all happened, none of it would work. How complex is hemoglobin? Well, hemoglobin is made up of four strands, a duplicate alpha strand and a duplicate beta strand. So the alpha strand has 141 amino acids in it. The beta strand has 146. So that's 287, and then there's a duplicate. So there's 574 amino acids. Now there are 20 amino acids used in life. They have to be in the exact right order for it to work. So if we just take one alpha and beta strand, which is 287 amino acids, if we just take those two, we say the chance of getting the first one right is 1 chance in 20. The chance of getting the second one right is also 1 chance in 20. We know from high school math, the chance of getting the first two is 1 chance in 400. The chance of getting 10 of them correct is 1 chance in 10,240,000,000,000.
And we're doing this
574.
So it's not even calculable.
No,
you can't calculate
to get 287, which would just be one alpha and one beta strand. The odds of that, if you multiply it out, is 1 chance in 2.5 times 10 to the 373rd power, which is a number with 373 zeros in it. It's one protein. You have 50,000 proteins in your body. According to some, other scientists think there's as many as 100,000 proteins. So what we just talked about, you have to see another at least 49,999
But
times.
Marv, I know that seems impossible, but if you just give it billions and billions of years, it'll happen, right?
Well, that's what they like to tell you, but think, how do they say that all happens? Well, they say it's natural selection and mutations is how that all comes together. But natural selection can only select from things that exist in the gene pool to begin with.
Correct.
So if I've got a bag with a green marble, a red marble, and a blue marble, you can reach in there as many times as you want. You're never going to pull out a yellow marble, right?
Right.
You can only select from what's in there. But they say mutations are the answer. But yet they know that mutations are either information neutral or they lose information.
Correct.
So you can't add any new information. If you're going to go from a single cell that came out of a mud puddle to us, you'd have to have unbelievable gains in genetic information to go through all the stages that they talk about. But
And that's verifiable. They've never studied something adding genomes to DNA, right?
right, well, they're big. The thing that they use all the time is bacterial resistance to. Okay, I'm losing my train of thought.
Like MRSA or some sort of
Well, yeah, bacterial resistance to medicines. Okay.
antibiotics.
Antibiotics.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the word I'm looking for. Thanks, Scott. Yeah. And the deal is this. I talked to years ago to a microbiologist named Kevin Anderson, who's with the Lord now, but he explained to me that what happens is the antibiotic by itself does nothing. That the bacteria has an enzyme in it, and the antibiotic joins with that enzyme. And with that enzyme, the combination of the enzyme and the antibiotic creates the poison that kills the bacteria. Now, if you've got a mutant bacteria that doesn't have that enzyme, then the antibiotic doesn't do anything. So what happens is all of the bacteria that have that enzyme, they're all dead. The only thing left to reproduce is the ones that didn't have that enzyme to begin with. So bacterial resistance to antibiotics is not as a result of, it's not that the bacteria said, ooh, here comes some poison, I better figure something out here. That's not the way it happens.
Right.
What happens is it actually is resistant because of less information, not because there's more information. So, and look, I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be one. I got interested in this subject. To me, this is all common sense.
Right.
It's
right.
all common sense. Now, I can hook you guys up with molecular biologists and with geneticists. I can hook you up with all kinds of guys. They will tell you the same things I'm telling you. They'll do it way more articulately than I do. But look, this is common sense stuff. When we talk about systems, you know every system has to have a designer.
Right.
There's no such thing as a system without a designer. And then you look at the complexity of all this and say, seriously, here, the question is not, is there a creator? The question is, who is the creator? There has to be one.
Amen. Yeah. That when you brought up scientists, I've read a lot of stats, but it seems like the vast majority of the science community is actually for creationism. So they don't teach that because that's not a popular view for the culture, right? So, but I think, anybody who's reasonable, anybody who looks through the science of it, you either got to ignore science, and then are you a scientist if you're ignoring science, or you got to take the step of faith.
Well, it's science, evolution and creation are both faith-based propositions. Because no matter how many scientists, the guys in the white lab coats, no matter how many times they profess this or how loudly they profess it, Nobody was there to observe it. Well, God was there.
Yeah.
But in their worldview, nobody was there to observe any of this. They are filtering all this through a worldview that says we have to figure out how all this happened by natural processes without a creator.
Right. Right.
Okay? Without a creator. So they have to look at the cell and say, well, it had to have come up on its own. How did that happen? Well, they've come up with the story that they are now telling. But you can't, there's two kinds of science. There's a science that we use in laboratories every day that come up with, space shuttles and medicines and all kinds of things. It's observable and testable in a lab and repeatable and falsifiable. That's what it has to be to meet the scientific method. So if we have, just as an example, if my hypothesis is that water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level, I can test that, right? I can put a pan of water in a freezer at 33 degrees. It doesn't freeze. I try it again. It doesn't freeze. I set it to 32. I put the pan of water in. It freezes, and it freezes every time. Observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable. Evolution, how are you going to test evolution? To be fair, how are you going to test creation?
Well, I think the other part of evolution is since they've had it, what has evolved? I mean, since we've kind of gone there now, we can't go back to how it all started, but what else is evolving? I mean, the idea of evolution is that things are always evolving, right?
Right.
What's evolved?
Well,
Is there a new species of person?
See what they
or anything that's mutated like that?
Well, micro and macro.
Right, yeah. Right. What they'll tell you is, birds get bigger beaks and smaller beaks. Dogs have floppy ears and pointy ears. That's all Scott micro is what you were just saying.
That's a lot of time adaptable too, right? To the changing. I mean, we're adaptable too. Yeah. Like you get dark skin when you're in the sun and you don't burn down.
Well, that's just that would be considered natural selection.
Exactly, exactly. If you look at populations of people, well, now people can get on planes and move wherever they want, but people who live closer to the equator are darker skinned.
Yeah,
the dark skin gives them a survival advantage, over people with light skin who could get skin cancer where it's real sunny. You look in Scandinavia, you got most of these pale white-skinned people, right? Or light-skinned people. So, yeah, it is natural selection, but it's like with the dog kind with the ears and everything, it's within a created kind. That variability is in there already. You don't see dogs becoming birds.
Well,
right?
I've heard this theory too, and it's not. I guess maybe not even theory. It's just a different way of thinking about it, though. And it's not even micro evolutions. It's the draw of that particular attribute or whatever to that species that would cause them to go there. So, like if you go to Africa and you go to the plains of Africa, it's hot, it's flat. So you're going to have people that can have long stride lengths that can deal with the sun. So you're going to have tall, dark people.
Right.
You go to Scandinavia, maybe there's mountainous regions, not a lot of sun. So they're going to have shorter feet so they can climb mountains. Not that was not that people were living there and then over time their legs got shorter, but those people were there because it was they could live there. They had shorter legs. So all the people that lived there, they went and said, she's got short legs. She can move around my house in the mountains pretty well. And so over time, just more and more short people with short legs lived by the mountains.
Yeah, you won't find any creationist who doesn't say that natural selection exists. The other side essentially says that is evolution. It's not.
Right.
Natural selection. If you put a population of dogs in Alaska or in the Yukon, and you had some with long hair and some with short hair, and they interbred and all that, over the course of time, if you didn't introduce any new dogs to the population, you're going to have all long-haired dogs because they have a survival advantage in that environment.
Correct.
That's the way it works. So one thing I use all the time that it's been a while since I've gone online and debated people and all that. But here's something I lay out for them, okay? One of these four things is true. Matter and energy, number one, matter and energy do not exist. Number two, matter and energy are eternal. Number three, matter and energy spontaneously generated or just came from nothing. Or number four, matter and energy were created. Now, if we look at the laws of nature, and we say, first of all, number one, matter and energy don't exist, that's falsified by the scientific method because we observe it every day, right? Matter and energy are eternal is actually falsified by, you mentioned the laws of thermodynamics, Scott. The second law essentially says everything is running down. Mm-hmm. We are running out of usable energy, okay? We're headed towards heat death as a universe. So there has to be a beginning, because if the universe was eternal, that would have happened already, and they don't even argue that. They say the beginning was the Big Bang. So everybody agrees there was a beginning. Number three, matter and energy spontaneously generated. Well, you mentioned the first law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics is that energy by natural processes can't be created or destroyed. There's also a law of the conservation of matter that says matter by natural processes cannot be created or destroyed. You also have the law of cause and effect, or the law of causality, that says for every effect there has to be a greater and pre-existent cause.
Equal or greater, right?
Right.
Okay.
And you can't have the cause, the initial cause can't come from nature, because you'd never get back to an initial cause. You'd have an infinite regress and never get back to an initial cause. So the first cause has to come from outside of nature. So that's falsified. So what do we got left? Matter and energy were created. Can we falsify that? Nope. Can we prove it? Nope. But it's the only thing we have left that hasn't been falsified by natural law. As I said earlier, the question is not, is there a creator? The question is, who is the creator? Yeah. The Bible tells us 5 times in the New Testament that God the Father created everything through his Son, Jesus Christ. And when I look at Scripture, and I have a presentation that I give called Science in the Bible, and we look at things, just as an example, the second law of thermodynamics. In the Psalms, there's a law, or excuse me, not a law. In the Psalms, there's a verse that says, heaven and earth will wear out like a garment. That's the second law of thermodynamics. It was actually written 2,800 years before the second law was identified by secular science. In Amos and in Job and in the Psalms, there's a description of the hydrologic cycle. The hydrologic cycle essentially is water evaporates, it forms clouds, the clouds drift over land, it rains, okay? The rainwater flows into the rivers, lakes, and aquifers, and eventually it either,
falls or doesn't.
Yeah, it
well, we're going to have to get in there. I want to get you in here one of these days and talk about the flood. We can have a whole episode on the flood.
He talks about the dust of his feet, right, too? God, in the Bible, it's poetic, but he says the dust of his feet causes the rain to fall. And you can't have rain without dust particles, right?
Well, that's true, but I'm not sure if that's one I'd love to see that. It's not one that I've seen. But the bottom line is the hydrologic cycle, it either evaporates again or it flows to the ocean, completing the cycle. That's written about in 3 places in the Old Testament. It was 2,600 years later before that was identified in the 16th century, the hydrologic cycle. So
they do that all the time in the Bible. They did that with the blood. It says in the Bible says the life is found in the blood.
Right.
But they didn't find that out until like the 800s or.
Oh, it was later than that because in the 18th century they were still doing, the beginning of the 1800s they were still doing bloodlettings.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So just that you know that verse that you were looking at, I was looking it up because I remember it too. It's in Nahum 1:3. Mm-hmm. So it says, "The Lord is slow to anger, but great in power. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. His way is the whirlwind and the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet.
There you go. It's an amazing book, and like I said, I've spent 50 years of my life ignoring God, and once
Now you got to spend 50 years trying to get to know him.
take way more than that. Yeah, I mean now, I can't get enough of this. I want to know Him more every day and understand Him more. And when you look at the grace and the mercy that He pours out on us all the time, I'm sitting here going, yeah, I love the parable of the vineyard workers because the vineyard owner hires people first thing in the morning. He hires people at noon. He hires people at the end of the day. He pays them all the same. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you come to the Lord when you're 9 years old or you're 90.
Right.
If you come to the Lord, the reward is the same. And I was 50. I mean, I know people that were older than that. It's thank God that He opened my eyes to this.
Amen. Well, and we're blessed that you have such a passion for creationism because He's using that passion to use it for His glory for young people. I mean, when you're sitting here telling me about the giraffe and the beetle, I'm just sitting here soaking that in as a sponge. I mean, that's why I said I really, when we went to the zoo and did that thing, I was sitting there just soaking all that stuff in because you had so much good stuff. And I really enjoy this, especially when it gets in the practical side. I mean, I think anybody who's watching today, they may not get into all the molecular or even the thermodynamic stuff, but they will all appreciate a giraffe.
Oh, right.
Who doesn't look at a giraffe and sit there and just pure awe and look at that? Or who hasn't looked at some of these beetles and go,
yeah,
what is the purpose of this?
I would want to do, if you're up for it, another one of these. And
Okay.
we just go through animals after animals and just talk good on God's creation.
I would love to do that. I'll tell you what, each animal, I mean, if you think about like just an elephant's trunk, he can pick up a blade of grass with his trunk. How else would he eat? He can't bend,
Yeah. Big lips.
Yeah, one of the animals I did for the kids, and they've moved him at the zoo now. He's in the children's zoo, so we can't do him anymore. But the North American river otter. His primary food source is fish. And so if he's up in Minnesota or Michigan or up in Canada and the water freezes over in the winter, he actually, and I don't know how they measure this or count this or whatever, but the consensus among scientists is that a square inch, which is about that, a river otter has 400,000 hairs per square inch. And God Scotch guarded his hair.
That's incredible.
So water, just like with Scotch guard, it just kind of, it doesn't penetrate. So when he's in the winter and the pond is frozen over, he can get under the ice. He can stay underwater for 8 minutes at a time. The icy cold water never gets through to his skin to make him cold because his fur is so thick.
Huh.
His whiskers, because it's dark down there, his whiskers are motion detectors. So he can feel a fish swim by. He has, like when you were a kid, we had nose plugs if you got water in your nose and ear plug. He has those. When he dives, the plugs close in his ear and close in his nose. So
that's awesome.
Every animal is so amazing. I'd love to do that, Scott.
Yeah, well, we'll do that. I think we're going to have you back many times because it's something that fascinates both of us. I know you are hugely into like some of the earth and molten. I like the flood, obviously.
The 7 rock layers, how they all fall the exact same way every time. You heard this one?
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm
sure
we have one of our guys, Zach Klein, is it's his avocation, but he'd love for it to be his vocation. He loves geology.
Okay.
And
well, we'll have to get him on here and have him do that.
We've got guys who speak on all the different areas, and we've got friends as well around the country. So
that's awesome. Well,
I can get you whatever guests you want. I appreciate you guys giving me the time to talk about this. You can tell how passionate I am about it and how I love it.
Well, we want to see people be able to know about the resource. The good thing about this is I know that there are people all over the place watching this, pastors, everyday people, lay people, and even educators.
Right.
I'd like to see this get into schools because we don't have to get into specifics of the scripture to talk about the fact that there's a creator and that this all came to be. I think it's just science, and so somehow we've this country started on that, and somehow it's shifted where we can't bring in anything that has any tie to the spiritual. But the fact is if we ask them, "Are you spiritual?" they'd all say they are spiritual. So how do you untie the spiritual just because you're at a school? And I find that very, very conflicting, even in the public sphere, that when people say, like, well, you can't have that. And I'm like, well, what do you, without that, then it's filled with something, right? The gap's got to be filled with something. So
Imagine that, giving kids, students, telling them both sides of a story
yeah.
and let them discern and understand both sides and come to a determination. Isn't that the way school was? I mean, that's the way it's supposed to work, right?
Well, the king only cuts the tongue out of the person who he fears what he'll say.
That is
That's
a
a good
great
one.
quote. Yeah.
I will be using that one. I will give you credit.
All right.
All right. Well, hey, I think we got a lot here today, man. We've really appreciated having you on, Marv. Scott, do you have any other questions for him before we?
Listen, Marv, I have 100 questions. I have 100 more animals I want to listen to you speak about. You will be back on here, and I just know that sitting here listening to you speak about the animals, not only is it's easy to listen to, it's informative, it's fun, it's cool, and I think there's someone out there. If we do this time and get it out, and next time, someone will hear something that's said on here about God's creation that will make sense to them.
You know what we should do too is maybe make it mobile. Maybe we take a trip to the zoo one day and we'll get the mobile camera and have you kind of talk in front of each animal at the zoo, and we could turn that into an episode. So
That'd be absolutely wonderful.
I
That'd
can
be
play a
wonderful.
production guy, and Scott can ask you the questions.
Heck yeah, dude. We're doing it. We're doing it.
Trip
All
to the
right,
zoo.
well, we'll plan it.
All right.
We'll
All
plan
right.
it. The folks at the zoo have been really good to us. We initially in 2012, when we did it the first time, we let them know we were coming, and we had some difficulties because our groups were too big and we had some issues. Once we got through those issues, they have been so awesome down there. We call them and tell them we're coming. If people, and you always have some spoil sports at the zoo, hey, there's some guy up by the giraffes that said, he's talking about Jesus. And they'll just say, yes, that's a school group, and we know they're there.
Yeah.
And they've just been,
That's awesome.
they've been wonderful to work with. So if you'd like to know more, if anybody would like to talk to us about coming to your group or coming to your school or your church, we do everything from a 13-week series of classes, which we can do one night a week. We can do Sunday school. We have some mini series that we do. Or if your Sunday school classes are doing, as an example, if you got a Sunday school classes are doing something on the flood, we'll send a guy out with fossils and all kinds of things to talk to the kids.
I've seen your big one. I think it's huge.
Well, there's one of our guys has got, I can't even pronounce it. It's a dinosaur head that's, I think he paid like $2,000 for it. It's
Wow.
some kind of saurus.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you would just contact us through our website, which is mocreation.org, send us an email. We'd be glad to talk to you. Our guys, we all feel the calling on this.
Yeah, I would
In
even
other
say.
words, we don't need a lot of money to do what we do. We just are passionate about people understanding.
And Marv, you guys do a podcast too, right?
Yeah,
On there?
we actually just started it, and you can find information on that on our website as
I
well.
saw that. Yeah, it's on Amazon, it's on Google, and on Spotify. I saw when I was on your site. So,
Right.
people, if they want to check in on occasion and catch your podcast, they can like and subscribe on there. And of course, if they want to check out ours, they can.
Like and subscribe.
All right. Well,
I'm
Marv,
a like and subscribe guy, Marv. I don't know if you
There we
caught
go.
on.
yeah. But you can, look, we want to help both podcasts. So feel free to like and subscribe either one. And remember, if you're somebody who's got a heart for ministry and you want to support, even though he says they don't need a lot of money, it's always great when people can help support other ministries that are going out and supporting the body of Christ. So don't hesitate if God's leading you in that direction to do that. On top of that, we just want to say thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah.
I loved
And-
it. I really enjoyed it. Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. We'll have you back on. This was awesome.
Okay.
Yep.
This was awesome.
All right. Well, with that, have a great one, Scott. All right.
I don't have anything to say.
Yeah, nothing to say.
Bye.
All right. Bye.